Ever tried growing ginger only to end up with mushy, rotted rhizomes or sad little plants that never really took off? You're definitely not alone. Ginger can seem like a tricky crop. But here's the thing. Once you understand what this tropical plant actually needs, it becomes one of the most rewarding things you can grow at home. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the complete process of growing your own ginger from start to finish, covering everything from selecting the right rhizomes to harvesting fresh ginger right from your own garden. Plus, stick around to the end, where I'll show you how to make your own pickled ginger at home that's better than anything you'll find at a restaurant. Let's get into it. Ginger is one of those crops that most people assume you can only grow in tropical climates, but that's simply not true. Whether you're gardening in Zone 5 or Zone 10, you can absolutely grow ginger successfully. The key is understanding how to work with your specific conditions. And once you nail down the basics, you'll have a steady supply of fresh ginger that tastes nothing like the dried-out stuff you find at the grocery store. So let's start by understanding exactly what we're working with here. When we talk about ginger, most people are referring to common ginger, which is Zingiber officinale. That's the culinary ginger you see at the grocery store, the one you use in stir-fries, teas, and all kinds of recipes. But there are actually several types of ginger you might consider growing. Common ginger is the most popular for obvious reasons. It's versatile, stores well, and has that classic spicy sweet flavor we all know. Then there's baby ginger, which isn't actually a different variety but rather common ginger harvested early, usually around 4 to 6 months. Baby ginger has thin, edible skin and a milder, juicier texture that's absolutely fantastic for pickling. You've also got galangal, which is related to ginger but has a sharper, more piney flavor that's essential in Thai cooking. And there's turmeric, which is technically in the ginger family and grows almost identically. I grow all of these in my garden. But for this video, we're focusing on common culinary ginger, because that's what most people want to start with. Now here's something really important that a lot of people don't realize. The ginger you buy at the grocery store has usually been treated with a growth inhibitor to prevent it from sprouting on the shelf. That's why when you try to plant grocery store ginger, it often just sits there and does nothing, or worse, it rots. So while you can sometimes get grocery store ginger to grow, especially if you soak it for 24 hours first to help wash off some of that inhibitor, your best bet is to source seed ginger from a reputable nursery or garden supplier. The difference in sprouting success is night and day. I learned this the hard way years ago when I planted about a pound of grocery store ginger and maybe 2 pieces actually sprouted. Now I order my seed ginger from suppliers who specifically sell it for planting, and my success rate is close to 100%. When you're selecting ginger for planting, whether you're ordering online or picking through pieces at a nursery, there are a few things you want to look for. First, you want rhizomes that are plump and firm, not shriveled or soft. Give them a gentle squeeze. They should feel solid, almost like a fresh potato. If they're squishy or wrinkled, pass on them. Second, look for pieces that have visible growth buds. These are those little pointed nubs you'll see on the surface of the rhizome, sometimes called eyes, similar to what you'd look for on a seed potato. The more eyes you see, the more potential growing points you have. Some of those buds might already be starting to turn green or even show a tiny bit of growth, and that's actually ideal. It means the ginger is ready and eager to grow. Size matters too when it comes to seed ginger. You want pieces that are at least 2 to 3 inches long, with at least 2 or 3 good buds on each piece. Smaller pieces can work, but they have less stored energy to fuel that initial growth, so your plants might be weaker. Larger pieces with multiple buds will give you stronger, more vigorous plants right from the start. When you order seed ginger, it typically comes in 1 pound or half-pound quantities, and a pound will usually give you enough to plant about 6 to 8 good-sized pieces, which is plenty for most home gardeners. One thing I always recommend is letting your seed ginger pieces sit out at room temperature for a few days before planting, especially if they've been shipped or refrigerated. This gives those buds a chance to wake up and start activating. You'll often see the eyes start to swell and turn green during this time, which is exactly what you want. Think of it like pre-sprouting. You're giving the ginger a head start before it goes into the soil. Now let's talk about getting your containers and soil ready, because this is where a lot of people make mistakes that cost them later. Ginger is a tropical plant with relatively shallow but spreading roots, so your container choice really matters. You want something that's at least 12 inches deep, but more importantly, you want something wide. Ginger rhizomes grow horizontally, spreading outward from the original piece you planted, so a container that's 18 to 24 inches wide is ideal. I personally love using wide, shallow containers for ginger. Something like a half wine barrel or a large rectangular planter works beautifully. You can also use grow bags, which work surprisingly well for ginger. I use the 15-gallon fabric grow bags, and I can fit 2 or 3 seed pieces in each one. Whatever container you choose, drainage is absolutely critical. Ginger needs consistent moisture, but it absolutely cannot sit in waterlogged soil. If water pools at the bottom of your container, your rhizomes will rot, and there's really no coming back from that. Make sure your container has plenty of drainage holes. And if you're using something like a decorative pot that doesn't drain well, either drill holes in the bottom or use it as a cache pot with a well-draining nursery pot inside. For soil, ginger wants something rich, loose, and well-draining. I mix my own blend that works incredibly well. About 50% high-quality potting mix, 30% compost, and 20% perlite or coarse sand for drainage. That compost is really key because ginger is a fairly heavy feeder and it loves that organic matter. If you don't want to mix your own, look for a premium potting mix that already contains compost and perlite. Avoid anything too dense or heavy, like straight garden soil, which will compact in containers and hold too much water. The pH should be somewhere between 5.5 and 6.5, which most quality potting mixes will already fall within. Before you plant, I like to moisten the soil mix thoroughly. You want it damp throughout, like a wrung-out sponge, but not soaking wet. This gives your ginger pieces immediate access to moisture without the risk of rot that comes from planting in soggy conditions. I usually mix in about a half cup of balanced organic granular fertilizer per cubic foot of soil at this stage too, which gives the plants nutrients to access as they establish. Now we're ready to actually plant these ginger rhizomes, and this part is pretty straightforward once you understand the basics. Timing is the first thing to consider. Ginger needs a long, warm growing season, typically 8 to 10 months to reach full maturity, though you can harvest baby ginger earlier at around 4 to 6 months. If you're in zones 9 or 10, you can plant ginger outdoors in early spring once nighttime temperatures are consistently above 55 degrees. For those of us in cooler climates, I start my ginger indoors in late winter, usually around February or early March, and then move the containers outside once the weather warms up reliably. This gives me a significant head start on the growing season. Fill your container with your prepared soil mix, leaving about 2 to 3 inches of space at the top. Now take your seed ginger pieces and lay them on the surface of the soil with the growth buds, those little eyes, pointing upward. Space multiple pieces about 6 to 8 inches apart if you're planting more than one in the same container. Don't crowd them too much because those rhizomes are going to spread out quite a bit over the growing season. Once your pieces are positioned, cover them with about 1 to 2 inches of soil. That's it. You don't want to bury them too deep because ginger rhizomes actually grow upward and outward, and planting too deep can slow down emergence or encourage rot. I've found that 1 to 1.5 inches of cover is the sweet spot. After covering, give the container a gentle watering to settle the soil around the rhizomes, but don't soak it. At this stage, ginger doesn't have any roots yet to take up water, so keeping things too wet is a recipe for rot. Here's something that catches a lot of new ginger growers off guard. It takes a while for ginger to sprout. We're talking anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, sometimes even longer if temperatures aren't quite warm enough. Don't panic if you don't see anything happening for a few weeks. As long as the soil stays lightly moist and warm, those rhizomes are doing their thing underground. I check on mine by gently brushing back a tiny bit of soil near a growth bud just to make sure things look healthy. Then I cover it back up and wait. Patience really is key with ginger in those early weeks. By the way, if you're finding this helpful so far, take a second to subscribe so you don't miss future growing guides like this one. All right, let's keep going. Once those first shoots emerge, and they'll come up looking like tightly rolled green spears, your ginger is officially established and things start moving faster from there. Those shoots will unfurl into these beautiful, long, lance-shaped leaves that have an almost tropical look to them. Honestly, ginger is an attractive plant, even if you never harvested a single rhizome. I've known people who grow it as a house plant just for the foliage. Now let's talk about the ongoing care that's going to make or break your ginger harvest, starting with light requirements. This is one area where ginger is actually pretty forgiving compared to a lot of crops. Ginger naturally grows on the forest floor in tropical regions, so it's adapted to filtered light rather than full blazing sun. In fact, too much direct sun, especially hot afternoon sun, can actually scorch the leaves and stress the plant. What ginger really wants is bright, indirect light or dappled shade. If you're growing outdoors, a spot that gets morning sun and afternoon shade is ideal. If you're growing in full sun, your plants will likely still survive, but you'll need to be more diligent about watering because they'll dry out faster. For those of us growing in containers, this is actually an advantage because you can move the plants around to find that perfect light situation. I keep my ginger containers on my covered patio where they get bright light all day, but are protected from the intense midday sun. They thrive there. If you're growing indoors, a bright window or supplemental grow lights work well. Just keep the plants back a bit, from south-facing windows where the light is most intense. Temperature is probably the single most important factor when it comes to growing ginger successfully. This is a tropical plant through and through, and it really does not like cold. Ginger grows best when temperatures are consistently between 70 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit. It can tolerate temperatures down to about 55 degrees, but growth will slow dramatically, and anything below 50 degrees can cause real damage to the plant. Frost will kill ginger outright, so if you're in a cooler climate, you absolutely need to bring your containers indoors before temperatures drop in the fall. What I do in my Zone 7 garden is treat ginger as a warm season container crop. My plants live outside from late May through September, and then I bring them into my garage or a sunny window for the fall and winter months. The garage stays above 50 degrees all winter, which is enough to keep the rhizomes alive even if the foliage dies back. In warmer climates, zones 9 and above, you can leave ginger outdoors year-round as long as you protect it during any unusual cold snaps with mulch or frost cloth. Now let's talk about water, because this is where finding the right balance really matters. Ginger likes consistent moisture. Not soggy, not dry, but that perfect in-between where the soil feels like a damp sponge. During the active growing season, which is basically late spring through early fall, I water my ginger containers deeply whenever the top inch of soil feels dry to the touch. In hot weather, that might be every 2 to 3 days. In cooler or cloudier weather, it might be once a week. The key is to check the soil rather than watering on a rigid schedule. One thing I've learned over the years is that ginger really benefits from consistent moisture rather than cycles of wet and dry. Those wet-dry cycles can stress the plant and lead to smaller, more fibrous rhizomes. I mulch the top of my ginger containers with about 2 inches of straw or shredded leaves, which helps maintain that even moisture level and also keeps the shallow rhizomes from getting exposed as the soil settles. That mulch layer has made a noticeable difference in the quality of my harvest. During the winter months, if you're overwintering ginger indoors, you'll want to cut way back on watering. If the foliage has died back, the plant is essentially dormant, and it needs very little water, just enough to keep the rhizomes from completely drying out. I water my dormant ginger maybe once every 3 to 4 weeks during winter, just a light drink to maintain some moisture in the soil. Overwatering dormant ginger is a sure way to cause rot. Ginger is a moderately heavy feeder, especially during its active growth phase, so let's talk about fertilizing. I mentioned earlier that I mix a balanced organic granular fertilizer into my soil before planting, and that gives the plants a good foundation for the first several weeks. But once the plants are established and actively growing, usually about a month after those first shoots emerge, I start a regular feeding schedule. During the growing season, I feed my ginger every 3 to 4 weeks with a balanced organic fertilizer. I alternate between a granular fertilizer scratched into the top of the soil and a liquid fertilizer like fish emulsion or kelp extract diluted in water. The granular feeds slowly over time, while the liquid gives a quicker boost. For the granular, I use about a tablespoon per gallon of container size, scattered around the base of the plant and lightly worked into the top inch of soil. For liquid feeds, I mix according to package directions, usually a couple tablespoons per gallon of water, and water it in. As the season progresses and you get into late summer, I like to switch to a fertilizer that's a bit higher in potassium, which supports rhizome development. Think of it like how you'd feed tomatoes differently once they start fruiting. You want to encourage that underground growth where all the good stuff is happening. A tomato fertilizer or bloom booster actually works great for this purpose. I make that switch around August and continue until about a month before I plan to harvest. One thing to avoid is over-fertilizing, especially with nitrogen-heavy fertilizers. Too much nitrogen will give you beautiful, lush foliage but smaller rhizomes, which is the opposite of what we want. I made that mistake my first year growing ginger. Gorgeous plants, disappointing harvest. Now I keep the nitrogen in check and focus more on that balanced to potassium-heavy approach as the season goes on. Beyond fertilizing, there's not a whole lot of ongoing maintenance that ginger requires, which is one of the things I love about it. You don't need to prune ginger, stake it, or do any of the fussy work that some crops demand. Just keep it watered, fed, and protected from temperature extremes, and it pretty much takes care of itself. If you notice any yellowing or dying leaves at the base of the plant, you can trim those off to keep things tidy, but it's not strictly necessary. Those leaves will naturally decompose and add organic matter back to the soil. One maintenance task I do recommend is hilling up your ginger as it grows. Similar to how you'd hill potatoes, you want to periodically add more soil or mulch around the base of the plant as those rhizomes develop and start to push up toward the surface. If rhizomes get exposed to light, they can turn green and develop a bitter flavor, so keeping them covered is important. I add an inch or two of compost or soil around my plants every month or so during the growing season, which also gives them an extra nutrient boost. Let's talk about some common problems you might run into and how to deal with them, because even though ginger is relatively trouble-free, there are a few issues that can pop up. First, root rot. This is by far the most common problem with ginger, and it's almost always caused by overwatering or poor drainage. If your ginger leaves start yellowing and wilting even though the soil is moist, and if you notice a foul smell coming from the container, you're likely dealing with rot. At that point, your best bet is to carefully dig up the rhizomes and check them. Healthy rhizomes should be firm and smell fresh and spicy. Rotted sections will be soft, mushy, and dark-colored with an unpleasant odor. You can sometimes salvage the plant by cutting away all the rotted portions with a clean, sharp knife, letting the cut surfaces dry for a day or two, and then replanting in fresh, well-draining soil. Going forward, make sure you're not overwatering and that your container drains properly. Second, bacterial wilt. This one is trickier because by the time you notice symptoms, the plant is usually too far gone to save. The leaves will suddenly wilt even when the soil is moist, and the stems might show water-soaked lesions. Unfortunately, there's no treatment for bacterial wilt. If you suspect it, remove and destroy the affected plant immediately and don't plant ginger in that soil again. The good news is that bacterial wilt is relatively rare in home garden settings, especially if you're starting with clean seed ginger from a reputable source. Third, you might notice leaf spots or fungal issues on the foliage. These usually show up as brown or yellow spots on the leaves, sometimes with a yellow halo around them. This is often caused by too much moisture on the leaves, poor air circulation, or overly humid conditions. Avoid watering the foliage. Always water at the soil level. Make sure your plants have some air movement around them, and if you're growing indoors, a small fan can help. For minor infections, you can remove the affected leaves and improve the growing conditions. For more serious cases, an organic copper fungicide can help knock it back. Fourth, pests. Honestly, ginger doesn't have many pest problems, which is another reason I love growing it. The most common ones you might encounter are aphids and spider mites, both of which can be dealt with easily. Aphids cluster on new growth and can be knocked off with a strong spray of water or treated with insecticidal soap. Spider mites are tiny and hard to see, but you'll notice fine webbing on the undersides of leaves, and the leaves may look speckled or dusty. These are more common in dry indoor conditions. Increasing humidity and spraying the leaves with water usually keeps them in check. Neem oil works well for both pests if you need something stronger. Fifth, slow or stunted growth. If your ginger just isn't taking off the way you expected, the culprit is usually temperature. Remember, ginger really needs that warmth to thrive. If nighttime temperatures are dipping below 60 degrees regularly, your ginger will just sit there looking unhappy. Move the container to a warmer spot. Or if you're growing indoors, consider using a heat mat under the container to keep the root zone warm. Once temperatures are consistently in that 70 to 85 degree range, you should see growth pick up. The good news is that if you follow the steps we've covered so far, good drainage, proper watering, warm temperatures, and starting with quality seed ginger, you should be able to avoid most of these problems entirely. Now for the moment we've all been waiting for, harvesting your ginger. This is where all that patience and care really pays off. You have two main options when it comes to harvesting. You can harvest baby ginger early, or you can wait for fully mature ginger. Baby ginger can be harvested starting around 4 to 6 months after planting, once the plants are well established and growing vigorously. Baby ginger has thin, tender skin that doesn't need to be peeled, a milder flavor, and a juicy, less fibrous texture. It's absolutely fantastic for pickling, slicing thin for salads, or eating fresh. To harvest baby ginger, you can either dig up the entire plant, which ends your harvest from that plant, or you can carefully reach into the soil at the edge of the container and break off a piece of rhizome while leaving the rest of the plant intact. That second method lets you take what you need while the plant continues growing. For fully mature ginger, you'll want to wait 8 to 10 months after planting, which typically means harvesting in late fall or early winter if you planted in late winter or early spring. The signal that ginger is ready for harvest is when the foliage starts to yellow and die back naturally. This means the plant is putting its energy into the rhizomes rather than top growth, and the ginger is reaching full maturity. Mature ginger has thicker, papery skin, a more concentrated and spicy flavor, and stores much longer than baby ginger. To harvest mature ginger, I like to stop watering about a week before I plan to dig, which helps the rhizomes firm up a bit and makes them easier to handle. Then I simply tip the container on its side or dump it out onto a tarp and gently work through the soil to extract the rhizomes. You'll be amazed at how much those original small pieces have multiplied. A single 2-inch piece of seed ginger can easily produce a pound or more of harvestable rhizomes in one growing season. Once you've got your ginger out of the soil, brush off the loose dirt, but don't wash it yet if you're planning to store some of it. Unwashed ginger with the soil brushed off will store longer than ginger that's been washed. For long-term storage, I keep my mature ginger in a paper bag in the crisper drawer of my refrigerator, where it'll stay fresh for several months. You can also freeze ginger. Just wash it, pat it dry, and freeze it whole or sliced. Frozen ginger grates beautifully and actually becomes easier to work with than fresh. If you want to keep your ginger growing year after year, save a few of the best-looking rhizomes from your harvest to use as seed ginger for next season. Choose pieces that are firm, plump, and have plenty of healthy-looking growth buds. I store my seed ginger in slightly damp peat moss or vermiculite in a cool spot around 50 to 60 degrees until I'm ready to plant again in late winter. This way, you only have to buy seed ginger once, and you'll have a self-sustaining supply from then on. One more thing about harvesting. Don't forget that ginger leaves and stems are edible too. They have a mild ginger flavor and can be chopped and used in stir-fries, soups, or teas. I often snip a few leaves throughout the growing season to add to dishes, which doesn't harm the plant at all as long as you don't take too many at once. It's a nice bonus while you're waiting for those rhizomes to mature. Now for that bonus tip I promised you at the beginning. Let's talk about making your own pickled ginger at home. Because once you've grown your own ginger, this is hands down the best way to enjoy baby ginger especially. Here's exactly how I do it. Start with about 8 ounces of fresh baby ginger. The younger and more tender, the better. If you're using mature ginger, it'll work too, but the texture won't be quite as delicate. Slice the ginger as thin as you possibly can, ideally using a mandolin if you have one. You want those slices almost paper thin, maybe 1/16 of an inch or so. Put the slices in a colander, sprinkle them with about a teaspoon of salt, toss to coat, and let them sit for about 30 minutes. This draws out some moisture and softens the ginger. While that's happening, make your pickling liquid. Combine 1 cup of rice vinegar with 3 tablespoons of sugar and half a teaspoon of salt in a small saucepan. Heat it over medium heat, stirring until the sugar and salt dissolve completely. You don't need to boil it, just get everything dissolved. Remove it from the heat and let it cool for a few minutes. After the ginger has sat with the salt, you'll notice it's released some liquid and become more pliable. Give it a quick rinse under cool water and then blanch it in boiling water for about 30 seconds. This is an optional step, but I find it mellows the sharpness just a bit and gives you that characteristic pink color if you're using young ginger with pink tips. Drain the ginger well and pack it into a clean glass jar. Pour the warm pickling liquid over the ginger, making sure all the slices are submerged. Let it cool to room temperature, then cover and refrigerate. You can start eating it after about an hour, but the flavor really develops after a day or two in the fridge. It'll keep for several months refrigerated, though in my house it never lasts that long. This pickled ginger is perfect alongside sushi, on rice bowls, in salads, or honestly just eaten straight from the jar as a snack. The flavor and freshness are on a completely different level from the store-bought stuff, and there's something incredibly satisfying about serving pickled ginger that you grew yourself from scratch. So that's everything you need to know to grow your own ginger at home, from selecting the right rhizomes all the way through harvesting and preserving your crop. If you found this helpful, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future growing guides. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know if you've tried growing ginger before, or if you're planning to give it a shot after watching this. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.